Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Schreffler from the Department of Art History, and Design. And on behalf of my department and the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies, I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to this lecture by Eugene Wang. Professor Wang is the Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller Professor of Asian Art in the Department of History of Art and Architecture at Harvard University. Before taking his position at Harvard in 1997, he was on the faculty at the University of Chicago, where he and I coincided for just 1 year when I was in graduate school there. Professor Wang is the recipient of numerous awards, including fellowships from the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the Getty Foundation, and the American Council of Learned Societies. His book, Shaping the Lotus Sutra, Buddhist Visual Culture of Medieval China, published by the University of Washington Press in 2005, received the Academic Excellence Award from Risho University, Japan. His extensive publications cover the entire range of Chinese art history, from ancient funerary art to modern and contemporary Chinese art and cinema. And his work has been published in journals including the Art Bulletin, Art History, Critical Inquiry, and many others. He also wrote the screenplay for a short film, Stony Touch, selected for screening at the Hawaii International Film Festival. We're delighted to have Professor Wang here at Notre Dame this afternoon. The title of his talk is, What Was the Terracotta Army For? Please join me in welcoming Eugene Wang.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's actually incredible that after 20 years, he hasn't changed a bit. I immediately recognized him when I saw him. He was like that back in Chicago more than 20 years ago. It was such a delightful trip here. The first time I come to Notre Dame, and had I been a better organizer, I should have timed my trip with Notre Dame game day. I would demand that I be taken to the but that's too late. But anyway, next time. The title of my talk is What Was the Terracotta Army For? It is, of course, a teaser, but it's a serious teaser. I do mean that to ask that question seriously. And of course, we'll provide an answer. Now, the bigger question I would raise, of course, is not just probing this question of what was the Terracotta Army for, but ask the larger question, what was eternity in the early Chinese context? Because you hear a lot of that bandied around in the popular press, and also what does it mean when we say fly to heaven in the afterlife world? Again, you hear a lot of that talk in the popular press. So these are the two larger questions. But anyway, so I'm going to start with a video clip, and I'll go from there, and then we go from there.
From that dust. In 1974, some farmers, digging a new well in the shadow of a strange hill, collided with history. For at the bottom of that simple well stood the army of the mighty Qin, still leading their emperor into eternity.
Leading the army into eternity. Really? That's a question I want to ask. And also, just to, because this is obviously one of the, rightly held as one of the wonders of the ancient world. You have about 8,000 terracotta warriors, life-size, and none of them actually look like each other. In fact, they, with the modern technology, we're able to do the big data analysis and then try to do the face recognition. And then the result is that none of them look like one another, so which is not mass produced. So the question is what for, of course. And again, I mean, if you attend to the popular press, everyone basically tells the same story. That is, the army is there to defend the tomb. Before we move, I'll just give you a little background before we take this question head on. So we are looking at the state of Qing in relation to a set of 6 states to the east. And there was a period of what's called a warring state periods, when China basically was splitting all these competing states. And in fact, all these states were far more advanced in their culture and technology, far more sophisticated, especially the state to the coast. Whereas Qing started out as a quite backward state out there, and they were actually quite looked down by other states. They feel like, they are really nothing to speak of. But because of some serious reform and the use of talent from other states, they instituted, especially in respect of the law and so forth. So, and they turned out to be a very powerful state, and eventually annexed and defeated all these neighboring states and unified China, and where the emperor became therefore the first emperor of China. Now, so to this site. As soon as the first emperor ascended the throne in 246, he started to, or the construction for his mausoleum starts. It was just, and then it lasted almost 4 decades, from 247 to 208 BC. Now, oddities abound about this tomb complex. The foremost question is, what, again, as I mentioned, what is the army for? And if you look at the site, you'll find something quite interesting. For one thing, that the army is actually, if they were there to defend the tomb, they were actually quite far away. They're about 1 mile to the east of the tomb. As you can see, this is the tomb itself, and this is the terracotta army pit. So it's about 1 mile away to the east. Now, if indeed they're there to defend the tomb, they're not in the combat-ready condition. That's a curious thing. For one thing, none of these warriors wear helmet. Helmets were found close to the tomb, buried in a pit, whereas no one actually wear them. Actually, piles of these helmets were found in the pit immediately to the east side of the tomb mound. So you have this very curious situation where the soldiers who should wear helmets are not wearing it, whereas helmet should be worn are not worn. Right? That's the sort of curious situation. Also, there are other mysteries. To the east side, immediately to the east side of the tomb mound, they found 2 bronze carriages, exquisitely made. And they are widely believed, so the scholars will tell us, to be the so-called spirit vehicle of the emperor, because they're half size, not the real size, whereas the terracotta soldiers are the life size, whereas the carriages are half size, but made in exquisite bronze. So obviously they're very special. Now, and so scholars believe that they are the spirit vehicle of the emperor. Now, if that is the case, then you have, again, a very mysterious, a mystifying situation. It is as if the commander-chief, who should be commanding this army, basically waved to his army, say, "Thank you guys for defending me, and I'm leaving you. I'm heading to the west," because they face completely different directions, opposite directions. So what I'm saying is that the army faces east, the carriages face west. And scholars say, well, the carriage is flying to heaven, to the western heaven. Well, I mean, how do you add up? How do these two add up? How could they possibly go into two different directions? The key to unlock this whole mystery of the site, I think, lies to this particular pit called a K9901. There you have this bronze vessel, this called a ding vessel, this cauldron. Also from this pit, they found life-size terracotta figures with a bare torso and all in some kind of act of lifting things and so forth. So, and they look remarkably different in comparison with these terracotta warriors 1 mile east of the tomb. So what are these figures for? And they're widely believed to be acrobats, but they look too serious to be acrobats because they all look very solemn. Because this tomb, this pit has popularly been understood as is where they provide entertainment for the afterlife emperor. If they provide entertainment, and these entertainers do not seem to be intent in entertaining because they look all very solemn and serious. But ultimately, the most paradoxical part is this, or the most challenging part is this vessel, this bronze vessel. Bronze vessel in China enjoy a high symbolic status that stand for state, the solemnity of the ritual and ritual offering in ancestral temples and so forth. So how on earth it is found amongst the entertainers, the acrobats? So that's the sort of mystifying part of it. If we also, this is pretty large. If you compare with all these other major vessels at the time, you could see the one is taller than the others. And also in terms of the ritual status, there's a stipulation that if you're gentlemen, you deserve one vessel in your ritual occasion. If you're a vassal state ruler, you deserve 3. If you're ministers of state, you deserve 5. If you're a son of heaven, you deserve 9. And how on earth that you only have 1 here instead of 9? In other words, they don't seem to add up very well here, and they pose all kinds of questions. So currently there are 3 theories. The first theory is that it is meant for temple use, but in some kind of crisis situation, they quickly moved to this pit. The second theory is that it was a part of the funeral ritual. The third is that it is deployed for the acrobat. Now, none of these theories seem to hold water, because if it's a crisis situation, you could imagine because everything seems so arranged, so deliberately arranged, so it doesn't seem to have any sign of hastily placing a vessel, let alone you can place a vessel in all sorts of places, why with the acrobats? So that doesn't quite make sense. For the funeral, you could quite, the second and third theory gets at something, but then leaves something unaccounted for. If it's strictly funeral, then acrobatics don't seem to play well into that scenario. If it's acrobatics, then these figures look too serious for acrobatic entertainment. In any case, we need to, that's the sort of challenging part and paradoxical part about it. So we need to find some kind of parallel example or evidence to show why these two belong, why they add up to form some kind of interesting scenario. In other words, it is not haphazardly brought together. They are there for good purpose. So where can we find such a piece of evidence for us to make sense of this? Fortunately, through diligent hard work, I found the evidence about 1 century later after this tomb. You have a vessel scene there, and you have the acrobatic scene there. So if we can understand this system, we will be able to understand probably the first emperor's site. Now, this is a sarcophagus that placed a tomb occupant inside, and both the inside and outside are carved with exquisite scenes. So I don't have time to go through the laborious iconographic analysis to take you through that, because that would involve another lecture altogether. But just to quickly present with my finding, which is that it really comes down to a set of 4 scenes, both on the inside and outside. That is a seasonal cycle. Seasonal cycle is really the underlying template. And so you might wonder, well, what's the point of placing a seasonal cycle on a coffin decoration? The point is really like from early on, Chinese believe that the body is not to be trusted. And what makes life life is not so much the physical flesh and bones, but really some kind of energy achieved, the sort of energy force. And the way the energy works is rather like a seasons. It kind of has its kind of cycle. So that's why seasonal cycle is a form of mapping out energy force. And it's also a computational system, because it's when I identify these as a set of 4 seasonal scenes, it doesn't mean that they literally depict the season. It actually means a state, a particular state. And that particular state can mean a number of things. So it essentially have a system of 4 states. And so this, in some ways, what we have here is really a computational language, computational device. So, and the Chinese could already use other signs, such as this trigram, to describe each of these states. The way trigram works is that it consists of 3 lines. Basically, the way it works is exactly like computer works, on and off. If you have a continuous line is on, you have a broken line is off, and then you have 3 lines that allow you the variation to have a more complex description of a certain state of condition, right? So, so each seasonal entity or season is actually equated to one particular trigram. And I don't want to bore you with that very meticulous, detailed kind of description. Just to say that for us today, all you need to remember is probably just 1 or 2. That is the Kan associated with winter, and Li associated with the summer. And these are the 2 sort of opposite states. So maybe all you need to do is remember Kan. The point, as I said, that this abstract sign system is a way for you to corral and correlate a number of states. So can, for instance, can be correlated to a set of conditions and states, such as north, winter, water, kidney, essence. How on earth they belong together? Well, that's how Chinese believe that somehow they belong together. And you can mentally just switch among all these different entities. And so the minute someone says can, it's any of these values being expressed. So if we plug that back into the coffin, you will basically find that what it says is that the whole bodily system is not so much body per se, it is really a system, a set of states, an ecology that allows energy to go around. And if you plug the body in, they will give you a sense, there's a can. Can basically means kidney, makes the lower part of the portion, but also they believe that that's where energy is kind of generated. That's why, when you do the sort of meditation or Chinese style meditation, you kind of focus with that, on that field called cinema field. That field is where you start to generate energy, and once you generate energy, you try to move that energy to your brain. And so that's, then it was pictured in this kind of diagram where it's essentially this natural ecology is a sort of mapping of the body. The brain up there, the kidney area here, and once you generate some kind of essence, energy, you kind of move that energy upward. So that's how it works, right? And what's interesting also is that region is also believed, sometimes is described as basically every one of you carries a little cauldron inside in that region, because that's where the energy is produced. And so so you could see this diagram and see there's that inner cauldron that produces that sort of energy, right? And if we map that diagram, keep that in mind, and we find, what do we find? We find the cauldron between the wintry, so it's not so much winter, but it's a kidney, winter, water, darkness, a low energy, but nonetheless energy producer, and then that gets to the summer. So in between, in the spring, this cauldron is part of the spring scenario, essentially, all right? So as you can see here, so and you have a river scene with two figures trying to hoist this cauldron. But in all these cases, well, in this particular case, they actually have the cauldron tilted. And it's actually quite deliberate. Why tilted? And also, it's interesting that, all this water and so forth, we call that kidney region where, it's water, kidney, and so on and so forth. But in any case, just keep in mind one thing, that cauldron is that spring scenario writ large, and that's where energy renewal is happening, according to the early Chinese medicine theory. In springtime, you kind of try to get rid of your stale energy that accumulated over a long winter, and just to inhale the spring energy, so that inhaling, exhaling process is what is this breath processor, what I would say, amounts to. And so here you actually have this dragon, which represents water, springtime, and the transformation from one state, which is the watery state, to the air, to summer. So which means dragon is always associated with spring. So it's springtime, the energy renewals are happening, and you see the dragon exhaling something that is a bubble. It's actually air bubble exhaling that bubble. And if you don't believe what I said, here's what the early text, Eugene, the book changes. The commentary says that the cauldron is overthrown, its feet turn up. Why? Because it's meant to get rid of what is bad in it. So it's kind of cryptic language, but we get the point. The point is that the cauldron is really there to contain something, and then once you tilt it, that contained old stale thing has to be get rid of. And so if we look at that and we understand, there's this dragon is trying to exhaling this old stale energy. And here's the bubble on the coffin in another side where you could see basically the bird try to exhaling all this stale bubble, and then this growing young creature with antler, which is brain and all that, is shooting at these, basically say, kill these bad breaths, and life shall be renewed. Right? So that's the spring side. In any case, just remember this is part of the spring process, and it's just the energy renewal time. So we've taken care of the spring side or the cauldron side. We kind of get the point that this is a side. It's about springtime, energy renewal, and it's getting to the summer. There's that growing young force, because the Chinese classify the breath into two kinds. One is the yin, another is the yang. It's not so much static state. It's a growing state. So the yang is really about growing young state, and that's what the cauldron embodies. Now let's move to the acrobatic side, the acrobats on the opposite side, and see what it is doing there. Now we can see that if the cauldron scene means the growing young in the spring time, there's good reason to suspect that in fact growing yin is somehow associated with autumn. Let's shall see if that hypothesis stands. So in earlier iconographic conventions, the way people picture things in certain conventions, they would typically use the military scene to depict autumn. Why? Because the underlying conviction is that men should model their affairs on the natural reason of nature. If in the natural scheme of things, autumn is a time when some withering natural force is depriving trees of their leaves, is killing off life forces. That means nature is sending us a clear indication that that is a proper season for any military action or killing. So if you read some of these early Chinese ritual texts, basically says springtime, absolutely no killing, because that's the time when worms start to come up, the babies start to conceive, lives start to happen. So absolutely no warfare. Oftentimes, if there's a bad guy out there, go out there to kill him, because that's when the nature kills, and that you have. So the military scene is typically associated with autumn. And as the conventions start to develop, it becomes more of a sort of a martial exercise. And once you have the martial exercise, you do this routinely, it becomes more of an entertainment. So gradually, from the scenes of military action, it becomes more of a scene of martial exercise, and the exercise eventually evolved into variety show. So essentially it becomes acrobatic scene. So basically, each time you see this acrobatic scene, it means autumn. All right, and we know the reason because it kind of evolved out of the military scene. The military scenes grew out of this season of killing. All right, so if we sort of pause for a moment and take stock of what we said. Essentially, we have the seasonal cycle, and we also have how the growing yin and growing yang work, and how they are correlated to heaven and earth. So the idea is that in springtime, you have the green yang that would go up, and typically the images will be birds and mulberry trees where you gather silkworms and get ready for life. Whereas in autumn times, the military scenes, you have and the growing yin energy would go down. So going up and going down, that will result in the opposite of heaven and earth, winter and summer, right? So here's a vessel that shows exactly these scenes. You have the military scene, that is autumn, and you have the winter, the lowest energy state, but nonetheless animals start to be holed up, but then they're already mating, which means that even though they're holed up in winter time, in caves and so forth, but they start to producing life. But in any case, this sequence is autumn to winter, going down, the energy going down. Springtime, as you see women gathering leaves for silkworms, life is being conceived and so forth. And until you get to summer, it goes up, that the growing young energy goes up, and then you have the summit condition of animals mating, the sort of height of life. Now, this is the natural scheme of things, which means that they fall apart. These two kinds of energies, they don't come together. And that actually spells death in China. The idea is that the life and death are each defined by the sort of energy or breath condition. If breath scatter, you die. If breath concentrate and copulate, you live. That's the idea. So in order to use this vessel to enable that life process or vitalizing process, they add a middle scene where the yin force and the yang come together and mate. And in that mating process, life is produced in this vessel. So that's essentially what this decorative scheme of the vessel is all about, all right? So a lot of Chinese vessels, decorative programs, are all about this essential scenario. It is how do you bring energy together instead of letting them fall apart? That's essentially the thrust of these narrative situation. And if we go back to our sarcophagus, we'll see the cauldron and acrobats, each representing growing yang and growing yin, spring, autumn, as you can see there, and they end up in the summer, in this sort of high energy movement, right? Would it be, is it likely that the same logic applies to the cauldron and the acrobat here in this pit of K9901? You have the spring, you have the autumn, and they seem to come together, right? Again, let's go back to the sarcophagus we work with and see how the energy conjugation or ritual is performed. Here you have three figures, two below and one above. What they do is that they point up and point low. And the point is really something's going up, sometimes going down, heaven and earth. And then someone up there is trying to bring the two kind of force together. Notice So it's almost like heaven, earth, let the heaven, earth energy being brought together. And indeed, this figure is doing precisely that, trying to bring them together, right? And this is exactly the same kind of pointing that is in our pit, K9901. And also what's remarkable is that these figures come down to two groups. One more stout, heavier built, all aligned here, and one thinner, lankier, and skinnier, like this line up here, and they form a pair. They form pairs, in other words. So one bold hypothesis, even though it's going on a limb to speculate on this, is probably that this is more the growing young, in the sense that so the young, someone is still, the teenager or the young man embodies the sort of growing young energy, whereas this is past that, or it's already more muscular, more like a ready to kill, more associated with the yin force or with the autumn force. In any case, it's interesting that they are paired. And then there's actually a larger figure here who seems to oversees all this coming together. Now, also, it's interesting that the figure is doing the pointing, going up and so forth. And then on a separate sarcophagus, we see a scene of two figures raising the cauldron. Again, the symbolic force seems to be the same. And even they look remarkably similar with the bare torso with a pan, with a bare torso with some kind of pan. So, and they come in a pair. Again, the same cauldron scene can be expressed or represented differently, in which case you have the cauldron, but instead of two figures, human figures, you have a tiger and dragon. But the logic is the same. Logic is essentially like dragon is the spring, tiger is the autumn. And dragon is growing young, tiger is growing in, and having them together in the cauldron, good things happen. That's essentially the logic of it, right? And this pairing actually, it's often just a one way of describing a whole list of different states. So they can all be correlated into this kind of pairing. So dragon, tiger actually could mean all these things. And in particular, I want to single out the Mercury and lead. So to talk about Mercury paired with lead is the same way to talk about dragon and tiger coming together. And that is a good occasion for us to visit this paragraph in the first episode of Tune, because this is a passage pretty much everyone used to elucidate what's going on in the Tune. And so it says, the first emperor was interred in this Mount Li. They dug down to the third layer of the underground spring. Mercury, there we go. Mercury was used to fashion imitated 100 rivers. Above were represented the heavenly bodies, below the features of the earth. Now this passage has been, I think, grossly misunderstood. So pretty much everyone in China now believes that this represents China. It's a way of representing, the rivers represent, Yellow River, Yangtze River, and so forth. So but I think that's wrong, and especially in light of what I've just said. In fact, something that is probably more faithfully captured this description is in ancient Mexico, the feather serpent pyramid in ancient Tihuacan, where the Mercury is found in the underlying, the bottom channel, which somehow is strikingly similar to the first Emperor tomb case. And also ancient Mexico is the only culture that had this practice, and China. It's something to contemplate on. But in any case, so this is a sort of Chinese reconstruction of it, and they think that this represents a sort of geography of China, which I don't think it is right. So if we attend to the early texts, typically the point is that it is not a static model. It is really a dynamic model. So what is so-called heaven doesn't stay heaven forever. It's really the heavenly energy that can go eventually evolve and then go down, and the earthly energy that initially was a sort of growing young energy and then go up. So constantly you have this flow of energy that what's once below eventually go up, and what's once up there start to go down, and in doing so you have this dynamic model of the universe. And the condition that perfectly capture this dynamic model is music, the harmony of the music, that falling and the rise of the tunes, and that's perfectly embodied this cosmological model. And speaking of music, we actually have a good artifact that dates to around 433 BC. It's a duck-shaped lacquerware, lacquer box. What it shows on both sides, on one side you have a drum scene, on the other side you have the bell scene. So what does that tell you? Well, the drum scene is about, and also incidentally, dragon and tiger. So the dragon scene and the drum scene is about the springtime, when drums start to sound and to awaken the hibernating creatures from the earth. And that was the springtime. And the bell scene is about that sonorous sound that can go down, and that is somehow associated with autumn. And so in order to show that these spring and autumn energy can come together, as I mentioned earlier, they made a point about having this kind of intertwining form. Intertwining form to show that they don't fall apart, they actually come together. So what does that intertwining form suggest? It could suggest a number of things. It's called the rope pattern, but I think the more fitting would be this. They come together, the intertwined snake mating. Yeah, that's more of a Chinese early cosmological model, in the sense that it is really this sort of music, harmonic music that brings spring and autumn energy together. That's the growing yin and growing yang energy together. That is the key here. And not surprisingly, this rope pattern is found on the very vessel from the cave, from the pit that we talk about. You see there and there, right? So we also have indication that there were actual burning involved in the pit, because there were all physical signs of some burning, which means that some alchemical process was actually conducted in the pit, just to bring these two kinds of energy together as part of the revitalizing regimen. And if we turn to this again, to this bodily ecology, understanding the vessel, the Ding vessel, more as a sort of inner engine that keeps your body energy going on reproduction, then there's something more to think about, because it goes with the metaphoric understanding of this part of the body having the engine to produce more energy, but also it means that this region is also the water region, and the energy produced, you need to send that through the spinal cord to the brain. So in order to do that, you need a vehicle. So the ancient Chinese often use the sort of vehicle metaphor trope to show that you somehow mentally or physiologically, there's some kind of vehicle that brings the energy up to the brain to nourish it. And once you nourish, you send it down again. So that's the whole how it circulates, right? And not surprisingly, if you keep track of what's going on, there were paddling, there were some wheels, and then some fire produced, and then it goes up. And lo and behold, we have a cauldron here in this particular sarcophagus design, and you have a vehicle. Right. So, and let's turn to the site. Is it coincident that somehow we have the cauldron and we have the vehicle, right? Now, this is probably the moment for us to, and also, yeah, that's a vehicle rendered in half size. Therefore, it's more symbolic function rather than the actual carriage that can take real human beings. But in any case, this is the moment for us to reflect on the whole history of why do you bury vehicles in early sites. It goes way back, actually, in China, going back to Shang Dynasty. As you can see, this site where animal-drawn vehicles were entered in the tomb pit. And we can even take a broader view of the vehicle burial situation in the entire world. So essentially, you can go to different parts of the world and find a barrel or vehicle in different parts of the world. And here is a little diagram to show how this idea of vehicle starts to spread around in the world, and how they kind of transmitted around. But there was certain regional distribution, so China was not that big on this, in fact, right? And also, someone has done a study of the word vehicle that has been used, and there's a remarkable similarity in the word vehicle that can be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European language region. That probably the idea, the concept originally started there. In any case, the long and short is to say that whenever scholars talk about vehicles in early burials, they typically use two lines of thinking. One is that you will say, okay, if the vehicle is really well decorated, as in this ancient Tutankhamun tomb, it means it is well flagging social status. And if it's very crudely made, they say, well, it's not just for social status, it's a vehicle to take you to heaven. So, I mean, I read a large amount of literature. Basically, it's these two lines of thinking. I think now we actually have a chance to use the Chinese case to have a different take on this matter, because we have a richer context for us to substantiate a different insight. So you have the cauldron. The cauldron need to produce energy, and the energy need to be brought to a higher state. Therefore, you have a vehicle there, probably doing precisely that. And if you don't quite believe what I said, let's go take a closer look at the vehicle design to see, in fact, that concern with energy production is indeed part of the program. So the back door of the vehicle features a door that has two designs, inside design and outside design, but they come down in two patterns. One is the cloud pattern, which in early China typically means springtime, growing young energy, and this lozenge pattern, which typically means growing in pattern and autumn. So the fact that somehow there's an intention to bring these two together seems to be part of the design. And if we compare this vehicle door design with the sarcophagus, we see similar opposition. The wavy design and the lozenge design. And these are the two kinds of energies being brought together in the central vessel. Right? So apparently, both the vehicle here and the cauldron shed a great deal of light on what's going on in this vehicle. In other words, this is most likely what is called the river chart, or a river vehicle. And let's see again, this kind of design conventionally typically come in pairs: tiger, dragon, growing yin, growing yang, and the wavy and the lozenge, wavy, lozenge. And then, not surprisingly, or surprisingly maybe, surprise, surprise, it's found on the surface of those terracotta figures in the cauldron's pit, in the acrobat pit. And you have exactly this kind of design there, right? So a lot of it says that, okay, spring season matters, autumn season matters, and these are the symbolically charged states that make life possible. And so if we turn to the ritual text that talks about what's the typical activities the emperor and his minister should perform, it typically, or any educated people should perform, it typically comes down to a few. One is that, because we don't have time to go through detail, I'll just give you the sort of gist of what's these texts typically say. They will say, okay, in springtime, you need to capture geese. Geese make a good gift because they are sort of embodiment of growing young, coming back to spring and all that. So you actually use a gift of geese to present if you want to, if a man wants to have the hand of the woman, you present a geese of gift to the household and say, can I marry the daughter with this geese as a goose as a gift? So in any case, this is a highly ritualized act. Capturing goose or capturing geese is part of the spring activity. And then breast renew through vessels. That's another, we've already demonstrated that. And also, in springtime, you need to have this spring inauguration in the east suburb. Let's look at the site. You have the geese scene, you have the vessel, you have the spring inauguration in the east suburb. Now, this I need to read you this early description of. So in one text called the Annals of Master Lu, we'll come to that. Well, who is Master Lu? Well, we'll talk about him. This is standard text called the Annals of Master Lu. It says that in the first month of spring, there takes place the inauguration of spring. 3 days before this ceremony, the grand recorder informs the Son of Heaven, that is Emperor, saying, on such and such a day is the inauguration of the spring. The energies of the season are fully seen in wood. On this, the Son of Heaven devotes himself to self-purification. And on the day, he leads in person the 3 ministers, his 9 high ministers, the feudal princes, his great officers to meet the spring in the east suburb. All right. Now, that makes perfect sense that these are the sort of figures led by the, supposedly, the Son of Heaven in the east suburb, which means that it's far out there, 1 mile away from the tomb. And it also explains why this is a spring scene, a spring inauguration, because these are the figures who have their helmets taken away, meaning that they're not there to fight. They're there to perform a ritual, annual ritual, especially the ritual. But so here's the situation. You want to represent that it's a spring, therefore anything that's associated with fighting is to be avoided. But you also want to present the growing young energy. So I think for that reason, they actually choose these soldiers who apparently embody that young energy, this male, because it's exclusively male. But without the fighting gears, which means that it is a sort of growing male, growing young, out there in the east suburb, facing the east, right? Whereas the helmet is deliberately barreled, which means that it is not to be used. Or it meant that this is probably stands more for the military action, therefore standing for the growing in or the autumn to be correlated to or to conjugated with the spring object. In any case, this is what this text says, and I think that's what is happening. So in the end, I would just say it is the terracotta warriors. That's what they're for. They're there to embody the growing young energy, to perform the spring inauguration, right? And so I quote this passage from a text that was compiled by this man named Lu Buwei. So who is he? Well, he was initially in the state of Wei. You see, this is Qing state, and he's a merchant in the Wei, and then he went to this state named Zhao. And there he spot his chance as a merchant. He's very good in investment. In this case, it's not economic investment he's thinking of. It's political investment. So Qing and Zhao were often weary of each other. In order to sustain some peace, they send young prince to each other as a hostage. Basically saying, my son is out there, so you're going to not fight with me. And I'm not going to fight with you because my son is in your state. So they send a prince named Yiren. This is a Qing prince, sent to live in Zhao as a hostage, so that Qing is showing the good gesture, goodwill, that it is not going to fight with Zhao. But he, poor guy, had to live in Zhao. And so Lu Buwei found his political fortune coming. He's an investor, as I said, and he's very good in picking his whatever object that he wants. So he saw this prince as his chance. So he basically tried to get close to him and tried to install him as a future heir to the throne. And he had this wily way of working things out. But the prince actually had his eye on Lu Buwei's girlfriend or consort. And once he introduced him to her, he fell in love with her and said, I want to marry her. And Lu Buwei, being such a calculating person, said, all right, you can have her. So the two of them married, and their son is the first emperor of China. In other words, eventually he went back to Qing, become the heir, and then as a result, their son become the next one in line. So all this while, Lu Buwei was wary because he just didn't want to, because once their son become the emperor, he was weary that he might be suspicious. In fact, there's one theory that when he introduced him to her, she already carried his son, so that he might be the real father, biological father of the first emperor of China. So he, after they were backing power in the Qing, he tried to distance himself. He there was a moment the old flame was rekindled, but then he tried to distance himself away over it. And the way he did that was to introduce to her a young man, attractive young man named Lao Wei. And so they immediately passionately fall in love with each other and have a lot of affairs going on. And he disguised him as a eunuch. He's not eunuch. And so that he can freely pass into the inner quarters of the palace and consort with her. Now, why I'm saying all this? Because it's not just to entertain you, but there's something really relevant to what I've been talking about. So this guy is known for being extremely potent. And his male potency is illustrated in a very curious situation. They say he could use his male organ to have a wheel going, turning. And this is probably the rarest, most oddest kind of way of displaying male potency. I suspect that it come out of a result from mistake, later misunderstanding of what was going on. So actually, if we turn to some of the practice manuals of how do you do the sort of inner meditation to heat up your body and so forth, there's a language used in that says that when the male practitioner start to focus on the inner vessel, the inner quadrant, the male practitioner may feel the erection, or it is a state that feels like you have an erection state. So it's, in any case, we don't know whether it's metaphorical or but in any case, the language is such. So, and remember that once you heat up the energy, you need to use a wheel to send it up there. So that's where the wheel and the vehicle, the cauldron, heat, and the vehicle erection, they all become one related concept. So that you could see that this is the axle of a carriage, but it's shaped in such a way that look vaguely suggestive, or maybe not so vaguely suggestive. But what is remarkable is that you could see that intertwining motif is featured on this object, right? That snake mating motif is featured there. And I suspect initially they just meant it as more of a metaphor, a trope. They don't actually mean it as some sex organ. But then, as often the case, sometimes the metaphor began to be misunderstood, and people take it literally. In fact, in China, in ancient China, they were misunderstood and taken literally. So you have these things showing up in ancient tombs. And that caused a lot of problems for scholars. They have a hard time accounting for it. It's why the dead having sex in the tomb. And that's actually, if you turn to the popular press, again, recently in San Francisco, there's an exhibition that showcased some of this. And even the curator says, well, it's for the dead too. But I think this whole has nothing to do with sex. It really comes out of this whole inner energy. It has to carry it up, and because the practice may involve erection-like state, therefore, all that. So it was so that accounts, I think, for this strange description of Lao Wei having that kind of potency and being able to make the wheel move. Right. So, all right. So I want to end with essentially, I guess I answer the question I posed. So I want to conclude basically with a few points. One is that we now understand early Chinese often imagine heaven more as a wheel. Right? It's not so much a static condition. And also, we're now in a better position to evaluate whether the spirit emperor is going to heaven or not. And my answer is that actually it's not, the vehicle is actually not going anywhere. So the crucial thing is really that this whole site is really an ecological system where the energy is kept circulating. And so the point of the design for this site is not so much to show that you have the emperor dead body lying there in eternity, but more about how do we find a way, or how did they find a way to keep the energy force circulating in a manner of seasonal cycle so that life can be imagined. In fact, just to end with a little historical fact, it's actually even questionable the emperor's body was taken back to the site, because he died on his way in the inspection tour to the east, and in the hot summer. So they couldn't, once he died, they couldn't quite keep up, because in ancient times, you have to, if you die at home, there would be some kind of storage device where lots of ice to keep your body frozen so that you can wait for the proper burial and funeral ritual to take place. But in this case, you couldn't have that. So they pretend that the emperor didn't die, but then the odor is, the stinking odor is like unbearable. So they basically spread the word saying that, oh, we are actually bringing a lot of those fish back to the capital because the fish really stink. So don't worry, it's just fish odor. But so that's the sort of thing. But if you imagine it in the hot summer, they have to carry this body back to the capital is a tall order to fill. So there's a likelihood that the body never got back to the capital. But we don't know. But long and short is that we know for certain that in ancient China, actually, whenever it takes care of this kind of big barrel system site, body itself was less of concern. The conviction is that somehow the body is not going to be trusted. It's not going to be the medium to carry your life into the afterlife. It is the energy. It is ultimately the circulation of the system, the energy circulation, that makes life possible. So that's why this terracotta scene is actually part of that larger system to show that the seasonal scenes are properly enacted so that you have a larger ecology where life can be imagined and sustained. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Eugene has agreed to take some questions. If anyone has questions, we have time for a few. Marian.
Thank you. This is, I think, probably the most amazing iconographic analysis I've ever had in my mind as well. So my question is it, how do we sort of like think about the fact that these soldiers are life-size? Would it function equally well if they like the chariots were sort of like miniaturized or half-size? Like, what is there something that sort of like requires that they be life-size figures?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. My take on this is more like if they perform this ritual, more like from the living point of view. Because the distinction over the drawing is that if it's life-size, it's more related to living. If it's a half-size, reduced size, it's more related to the inhabitants of the other world. So, or the spirit of the other world. So to that extent, I think it probably makes sense for them to show that in fact it's more related to the, but then it's buried. So yeah, so I would sort of contradict myself in saying too much on that. So I would imagine it's probably to show that this growing young force is so potent that it's kind of life size. Or is it just simply the Qing states %, which is current theory, that why the life size, the current theory that they're so, this is very grandiose kind of group of people who love to do things in a very exaggerated way. Another theory, of course, is taking is quite prevailing, or at least having quite a splash, is that they think that this is more taking cues from the Western Greek model, because so I think there is some kind of Western influence involved for sure, but doesn't quite explain how they function in the system. So I don't rule out the Western influence, but it's more about actually it cannot add up if you take into consideration that it's more like Western style figures in that they're large, they're but then they fulfill the scheme in such a way that they're having the full size make them more and that's probably what is meant. Yes. But I don't have actually a clear answer to it, so it's an open for speculation.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a very, it's not, I don't know if it's a simple question, but it's a different kind of question, and that is when we see figures like this, I mean, even if it's one or two figures instead of dozens of them, we normally think that they're meant to be seen at some point or another. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the context, the archaeological context, you know, the ground level, for instance, the habitat, the level from which they were dug in, you know, the hole was dug, they were placed in. Whether there's any indication of whether they were intended to be seen, and if so, in what context, whether it was in just for a ceremony, or whether they were visible for a length of time, were there ramps leading down in there just for, do we know how they were placed in them? All of those kinds of very basic questions which would indicate, you know, what these beautiful figures, whether they were even meant to be seen.
That's an excellent question, because I'm so glad you asked it. It actually allows us to talk about, address this larger issue of the art function. This is something I keep repeating in a number of speaking occasions, that when we try to understand Chinese art, we should somehow readjust the sort of notion of art that we form in looking at the Greek sculptures and, you know, the Western art in general. In other words, to put it in a very crude and generalized way, mimetic impulse is very strong in Western tradition. How to capture how things look and represent as a showcase, that so that people can look and marvel how it looked like what we see in the real world, observed world, is part of the sort of engine that drives Western art. In China, it's very, very different. The mimetic impulse is very, very low. The anxiety is always, we have to make everything in place and to make sure the system works. So a lot of times the images were made simply not to be seen. We have cases in like bronze vessels, for instance, and some of the images were actually molded at the bottom where no one can see them. But the point is that the anxiety that we have to make sure all the bases are covered. That's the anxiety. You know, this overall thinking is all about system, to set up the system so that it can function, or in an imaginary way or symbolic way. So it's more, so that's the sort of early concern with a lot of Chinese art. It's just, it doesn't matter whether people see them or not, but we, or whoever make them or commission them, want to make sure the system has to be complete.
But clearly the mimetic, the mimetic impulse is there because they're all individuals.
Yes, yes, they have to make them convincing. Yes, you're right, because none of them look alike. So this is a very special moment. Yeah. So I guess that well, we just make this system work, but also we have to make it very convincing. They have to be very lively. They have to, I guess the anxiety is that they have to be really vital forces. So if we make them like wooden images, in most cases, in other later periods, actually we want to make them wooden. But in this moment, they probably was so much taken with the idea that somehow we have just to make them vitally alive. So that's probably account for the fact that they have to take all the trouble and pains to make them look like real human beings so that they can function in the system. Yeah. Yes.
I'm puzzling with the function of the system altogether because I keep wondering, are there political implications to this system? Because if you have this constant energy, is this trying to say something about the continuation of the state of the, meaning the political state that the emperor has set up? Is there any relationship there?
Not in the, yeah, you could say that. In other words, it's all, the culture is really a kind of cultural correlation. Everything affects everything else. So the health of this ecosystem itself is somehow the embodiment of the health of the state to that extent. Yeah. Yes. So there, in that sense, yes. So again, the anxiety is make sure that the system works, and the system can apply to a number of domains, both the sort of physiological system of the body and the system of the state. Yeah, these two actually were often talked of in the same breath because they are seen as related. So yes, in a sense, in a correlated way. Yeah.
Professor, they didn't have their battle helmets, but in the pits, they did have armament. They did have weapons, crossbows.
Oh, the pits, the terracotta pits, right?
Yeah, they had armament.
Yeah. But that's also, thank you. They have the armor, but these are dated weapons. They're bronze. They only, the advanced technology at the time was actually iron. So if you really fight, you will fight with iron. Bronze weapon already outdated. But so in this pit, they only have a handful, I forgot the exact number, but vast majority of the weapons were bronze weapons. And so I guess the point is actually that they're there for ritual purpose. And another thing that's interesting, there isn't much inscription except that actually on some of the bronze weapons, they carry the inscription of Master Yu Wei, the guy who was allegedly, some scholar, his real biological father, which meant that it was really the old-time object. Old object used for ritual purpose rather than real fighting, because otherwise they would have a warm the helmets. Yeah.
Thanks for the wonderful talk. It's really eye-opening for the interpretation. So I just wondering if you could, when you examine the imperial tombs of the Han Dynasty, could you find a similar, this kind of system constructed? Like, they probably also have this kind of carriage pit, right? Also have this kind of, people play, just for entertainment with a cauldron.
Yes. Yes. It kind of, the logic extends, especially to the Han tombs, especially in the way that the compartments surrounding the central chamber. That typically people, up to now, most people still interpret them as, oh, this is the center chamber is for the tomb occupants' sleeping quarter, And then there's a dressing room, there's this room or that room, just treat it as a replica of the living space. What I found actually is that, in fact, the four surrounding chambers are four seasons.
Very similar to the.
Yeah. So the logic thinking, the line of thinking underlying is similar. That the seasonal cycle is crucial to make this whole barrel system ecology work.
Yeah, they always have additional pits surrounding those major chambers.
Yes. So it's that seasonal cycle that is ultimate logic. Yeah. Yes.
I want to thank you for this very rich revision of how we've defaulted in favor of what appears to be nothing more than a martial display of the power of the. Really thrilled to learn about the compartments that contain, if you will, evidence of more of a cosmological reading, which is fairly important, I think. There are a couple of observations I just wanted to share. The first was that I wouldn't debate the issue of the phallic symbols and the axles, or would in fact have any difficulty talking about that. Certainly as a historian of China, I can tell you that, as you know, the Zhu, the very term that was used for ancestor, as part of the ritual practice of the Shan, who were very much conscious of the mapping of both body and heaven. Right? It seems to me that this is really part of what one would want to satisfy. You need to have ancestors, and you need phallic symbols to suggest, in fact, that those operate and those work. So I think we should keep that in mind. We should never have the hesitancy that people have had in the past to admit just what it is. It's there to symbolize fertility. That's a fact. That's the first thing I want to observe. The second is that I'm quite fascinated by how you constructed this way of understanding the facing, the orientation, and also the apparent more civil rather than martial view of the design. And I missed the first part of the talk, so perhaps you did talk about these being painted and being quite elaborate. So this mimetic dimension, what Robin's talking about in many ways, I think is important for us to consider. That there is this way of making grand and painting something which is, if you will, to reflect a rather large collection of warriors. And so I think that in a certain way, it's great to combine this notion of the martial and the cosmic and the religious quality of all this. And then I want to suggest that maybe there's something going on here that relates to Jizhi Wangbi's own obsessions that were somewhat Taoist and brings on the body, the Neiya practices here. Looking at, because we know he died looking for the pill of immortality, at least according to the Shirji and other texts. Now, Jack Dull has a paper that's never been published and that appeared in a conference in 1977, in which he explained why it was that in the end, the Jizhi Wangbi found that he was incapable of being able to persuade many of the peoples that he moved among as he traveled to find the pill of immortality. He was aware of the fact that his life was already, if you will, in the balance. He knew that he was not well. And he was seeking then this pill to make certain that he actually could survive. I think about all the yang of people facing in the direction of the rising and the inauguration of spring. This is clearly a very powerful sense of immortality as well, being linked to the heavens. So it occurs to me that this might be a rather immediate kind of parallel, if not unconscious one, between the whole army, in a sense, bowing before the heavens, and to do so almost to beg, if you will, the life of this figure, who in the end was unable to make it. And in the end, what Dahl specifies is that he probably brought his own demise politically on by virtue of going into each of these different towns and villages and walled areas to basically celebrate new gods. He actually tried to create a whole new ancestral paradigm, if you will. I mean, just imagine that in each of these places where he stopped. And Dull found documents that these people just went, "Get the hell out of here! What are you doing here? Our ancestors are what are most important. Your ancestors are worthless. What are they? You're simply a ruler. You have your own ancestors to deal with. Don't replace ours." And he said, in the end, this anger grew to such an extent that they believed that some of this carried over, he thought, to a point at which people became so aggressive in their opposition to those that followed him. and you mentioned Lu Wei. Why is it that Luo Shizhunzhou always talks about how it is that excess in the form of tombs, in terms of stone, in terms of objects, in terms of hunting fields, and all these things that rulers had and believed they needed to have, he just sort of denotes a kind of strong feeling of the civilization having collapsed or heading to collapse because of all this excess. And so here he is with the siring, the so-called, and the story is that he's actually responsible for the sun. Well, isn't that fascinating? Because the sun himself became a complete symbol of excess, even though the so-called father was one of the great denunciators of excess, which is literally in the Lu Shizhunzhou. So I'm not meaning to be lecturing. I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff here that strikes me as very relevant to understanding how the Qin should be understood less as martial, but more as religious and ritualized than we often think. So that's my 15 cents.
Well,
I was really inspired by this.
With regard to that, the male organ thing, I guess my point of contention with the current press is that they all try, or even the scholars in the field, they all try to figure out what it was used, whether it was used as some kind of instrument in the afterlife, sex life of the tuning of them. Whereas I take a different view. I don't think it was actually used. There's no way to use it because it's all scattered brass.
You can't wear it. I mean,
Yeah. So
I guess you could try, but that would be a real problem.
So yeah, that's my point of contention, current take on this, basically. Because actually, speaking of that, there's this strange object that has shape like with two male organs coming this way, but it's a one piece. And that, of course, if you think about what is that used for.
It's double yang.
There we go. Yeah, so that's exactly. So, but
one phallic symbol is yang.
Even like the best scholars who is completely on top of this material, Ying is completely puzzled by this. Why this in the tomb?
I'm not questioning this thing, and the fertility thing is what it's all about. And you don't have to wear it. You just put some men might do that.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there. That's as good a point as any. Thank you very much. That was perfect.
Yeah.